Hi, my name is Andrew Ibrahim. I'm going to be giving you a talk on what is a visual abstract and how to create one. I'd say this is by far the talk that I'm asked to give the most often, and in part because in 2016 I helped found the visual abstract and I was the creative director at the Annals of Surgery. And I'll try to walk you through what it is, where it came from, and how you could make one yourself. To give you some context about me, I live in three different worlds. I'm a practicing general surgeon, so I'm in the OR every Monday, clinic every Tuesday, and then on call every fifth week. I'm a formally trained health services researcher, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about research and how to get that research out. I help direct a group here called CHOP, and we're a pretty active and busy group, but in addition to being busy writing papers, we care a lot that our work gets in front of the right people and that they understand our work. So we track the policy output of our work, and in just the last 3 years, these are all the different policy groups and think tanks who've cited our research. And so as much as we like producing rigorous work, we really like to know that our work gets out to people who can change the way healthcare is delivered for the better. And before I did all that, I studied architecture. So I did my foundation coursework at the Bartlett in London, and then subsequently spent 6 years as a senior principal in one of the largest design firms in the world. And so that certainly informs how I think about design and some of these design principles. How that all comes together for me now, I have some research funding to study health in the built environment, thinking about health and design at the level of the hospital, moving up to the way hospitals deliver care across networks, and then the interaction of health and neighborhoods. To be. Tell you a little bit about the impact it's had and how it's been adopted. I'll walk you through some templates and just show you how I made them and how you could do the same thing. Then I'll show you some creative adaptations that I think are really kind of the future of visual abstracts and the way that we could kind of think about their impact even at a higher level. In case I lose you, I wrote a visual abstract primer that's open source at surgerydesign.com, and if you go there, you'll find some other guides and primers about how to write a research paper, how to design a hospital, and then of course the one on how to make a visual abstract. So what is a visual abstract? A visual abstract is the visual representation of the main findings typically found in the abstract portion of a research article. It's not a very good definition because I use both words in the definition, but it's probably better if I just show you. This is a visual abstract from the New England Journal of Medicine showing dual versus monotherapy for glioblastoma had no difference in overall survival. This was a survey in the Annals of Surgery showing that the three most common barriers reported by surgeon scientists to developing were pressure to be clinically productive, excessive administrative duties, and concern about work-life balance. This was a piece in the Annals of Internal Medicine that was actually not even a research paper, it was an opinion piece that was talking about other things about the way we design hospitals that we could incorporate into the things that we design about airports that we should incorporate into hospitals. And those are the five main themes there. And then finally, this is one from the CDC showing that 6 out of 10 middle schoolers and 7 out of 10 high schoolers don't get enough sleep per national guidelines. By no means are you an expert in any of those topics just by kind of looking at the visual abstract, but if you only had time to read one of those articles, you're now in much better position to choose the article that's relevant to what you want to learn. So I've been thinking of it a lot as a movie trailer. It's not a substitute for the article, but it does quickly show you a preview of what the article is about to help you figure out if that's a paper you want to learn. How do you find these? So visual abstracts became probably most popular on social media. So if you go onto the social media websites of any of the major journals, you'll kind of find them anchored there. Journals went a step further to create databases of their visual abstracts. So New England Journal has a whole database of all their visual abstracts. Not to be outdone, the CDC and JAMA quickly followed thereafter, and other journals have done so. So there's actually whole repositories now of visual abstracts. JAMA's gone a step further and actually integrated the visual abstract into the article. And it's a little bit meta, but that is a visual abstract icon that if you click on it, brings up the visual abstract of the manuscript. So how did this all come to be? I told you I used to live in London. briefly when I was studying architecture. And this is one of the most famous intersections in London. And one of the things that kind of struck me there is that when you go to cross the street, it tells you to look both ways. And largely that's because traffic is on the other side of the road. So if you're coming from the US like I was, you actually look the wrong way for cars, and it can be pretty disorienting. So this was the kind of the most efficient way to make sure you knew where the cars were coming from. And I remember my British friends would tell me, we write that stuff for you American tourists. And, I remember making the comment back to them, heaven forbid something should happen to me and I got into a car accident. I'm in London, one of the most kind of advanced metropolitan cities in the world. Surely I'd be taken to a good hospital and get good care. Fast forward a few years later, I've come back to the US, I've gone to medical school, I'm in surgical training, and I'm now in my 2 dedicated years of research, and I see this article come out, The Impact of Pan-Inclusive Trauma System on Quality of Care in London. Turns out London did not have a coordinated trauma system, and that if you were in an accident, you may get taken to a hospital that didn't have trauma doctors. They may not know you were coming, and they may not be prepared to handle the injuries that you had, and there's really no coordination amongst them. So when I saw this paper, I went to my mentor at the time, Justin Dimmick, and I said, hey, I know you're an associate editor at this journal. This article's a really big deal. Like, we really have to promote it. And it turns out, like, when you identify a problem, it usually signs you up for work. So I was made in charge of the social media account for Annals of Surgery back in 2016. So I was very excited. I took the social media account. I had a lot of followers. And I shared the text abstract of the article. Had 2,000 impressions, 8 people were so compelled, they went on to share it in their networks, and some went on to click it. And I thought, gosh, if only people knew what this paper was about more quickly, I bet they would go read it. So this was the birth of the first visual abstract that I created back in 2016. London Trauma, after establishing an inclusive coordinated trauma system. Access to a trauma first specialist on first arrival increased from 16 to 84%. Involvement of a senior clinician in the first half hour improved from 38 to 92%, and improved survival in critically ill patients went from 69 to 89%. I shared this as a visual abstract, and the impact was immediately obvious. It got seen 35,000 times in 2 weeks, and 250 people went on to actually read the article. Annals of Surgery had many good stories to tell. So over the next year, I created over 100 visual abstracts. And because I was formerly trained as a health services researcher, I didn't just want to study visual abstracts and kind of say, it's kind of intuitive that they work. It's just so self-evident. I really wanted to know scientifically if that was true. So we prospectively randomized a crossover trial where we took 44 original research articles. Half were shared as a visual abstract, half were shared in text format alone. And then we waited a 4-week washout period and reshared the same articles, this time in the opposite format, and then compared them head to head to evaluate the same outcomes in terms of impressions, retweets, and article visits. Not to get too meta on you, but this is a visual abstract summarizing the impact of a visual abstract. And in short, we could reproduce what we found in that first article. The number of times the visual abstract got seen went up almost 8-fold. The number of times it got shared went up almost 8-fold. And the number of article visits, people clicking through to go to the website, went up almost 3-fold. And I'd say for me, as someone who spends a lot of time writing research papers, we just had a paper published this past week that me and my co-authors spent over a year and a half writing and developing and workshopping. It really means a lot to have somebody actually go through and read the work. And so to me as a researcher, this is probably the most important finding. There was an important point at that point, an important decision to make. Should the visual abstract be proprietary to one journal, or should it be for the masses? And we obviously went with the latter decision and initially started with a 9-page visual abstract primer in version 1. And the most recent version now exceeds 50 pages. That's free to download, but in short, we made it open source. I lost track, but there are more than 100 adopters of the visual abstract. Stopped counting after 100, but you can see a handful of them there. And what's pretty rewarding for me on the design side is to see that the templates we provided kind of manifest themselves in the actual journals, but you see the journals have put their own signature and design flavor on it, but kind of building on the initial work of what we tried to design. This was the first visual abstract that got put out by the CDC. We kind of want to see like how much reach could something like this have. This was in the pre-COVID era, but this visual abstract within 7 days got seen over 1 million times, and more than 13,000 people went on to download the report. In the pre-COVID era, this was actually one of the most downloaded reports from the CDC's website, all from a visual image that was shared on social media. It took on a global audience. This was a conference in Indonesia where they started to use the visual abstract as a strategy to crowdsource what talks would be presented at their meeting. And then the Cochrane database, if I could think of a group that's, pretty strict, stay between the lines, don't get too carried away with things. I think of the Cochrane guidelines as one of those groups. And so when they shared the visual abstracts as a strategy to disseminate work, I kind of knew we were onto something. It didn't hurt to have some endorsements, and I think Otugawande kind of tweeting this out certainly helped. But what was important too is that the uptake was not just in dissemination, but it was also in evaluation. So since that original study that we put out, 5 other randomized trials have performed similar crossover studies in urology, in orthopedics, in other domains, nephrology, where they've been able to replicate the same studies. So what's the secret sauce? How do you go from this text abstract that's kind of hard to get access to, that people don't maybe catch the main message, to something visual that helps people find the articles they want to read much faster? I don't have enough time to tell you about all the guiding principles of effective design. If you go to the Visual Abstract Primer, you'll walk through, as early as the 3rd version, we had kind of built out a lot of these key design principles. But I'll walk you through a couple of them now that just start to give you a flavor of what kind of the underpinnings are of an effective visual abstract. The first is a thing about who is your audience. Think about your end user experience. Who do you want to read this thing and be excited about it? Is it scientists? Is it the lay public? Is it clinicians? When I was creating visual abstracts for Annals of Surgery, my audience was academic surgeons, and I knew by the nature of being surgeons, it was a visual audience, and so that would appeal to them. Certainly technical, we care about details, and so it wouldn't be okay to just give generic descriptions. I'd have to tell them specific numbers. And then finally, academic surgeons, and many of us, are busy. And so if it took more time to read the visual abstract than the text one, it wasn't going to work. So it had to be something that you could read efficiently. So one of the things we did when we were developing the visual abstract is we had people read the text abstract, and then we had them read the visual abstract, and we would time them and see how long it took. On average, people could read the visual abstract about 10 times faster than it took them to read the text abstract and still come away with some of the key points. The next design principle that was really important was clarity of purpose. This is a road out west in Colorado that when I went to visit my brother, I just loved to drive on because it's like so clear what you're supposed to do. You can't turn left, you can't turn right, you can only go straight. And in fact, the speed limit almost doesn't matter because you're on an open road, there's no other cars. That is how clear a visual abstract should be. It should be so clear where you're supposed to read. What does it mean? So effortless to move through. And I think about this visual a lot when I try to make it. So when you're thinking about clarity of purpose, you're thinking, what's the main message? Like, what do you actually want people to know about this article? So when I was doing that trauma paper, I was sitting next to a colleague of mine who was an internist, and I asked this person to describe that article, and they said, process measures and outcomes of care before and after implementation of a coordinated trauma system in the London region for patients experiencing trauma, specifically for patients with an ISS score greater than 25. Now, by no means is that like wrong, but what a mouthful. Like, I've given this talk so many times and I still get tongue twisted saying that. And so I ended up condensing it down to London trauma after establishing an inclusive coordinated trauma system. Much more concise, easier to read, and helps your audience know what the article's about much faster. To get to the point of kind of finding your clarity of purpose, I start with a short summary of the article, which is usually like the abstract that tells you what's there. And then I do this thing called a neighbor test. Could you take the abstract and in 3 bullets summarize the article in 3 short snips or bullets and tell it to a neighbor who's never heard of the article, never read it, and do they understand it? If you can do that, you're well on your way to an effective visual abstract. I think so many people get caught up in the visual part of the visual abstract, but the real secret sauce is, can you condense the content into clear, concise bullets? I channel my inner RBG at this point to sort of focus on being concise without getting too distracted or adding extra stuff that's not needed. As I mentioned, we workshopped the visual abstract multiple times, focus groups, the whole thing. This ended up being probably the most popular format that was in this 3-panel display, and it kind of had these key components. Summarizing the key question being addressed at the top, having the author and citation at the bottom, who created the visual abstract. In this case, I was representing the Annals of Surgery, so I put their logo there. But certainly don't put the journal's logo there if you don't represent them. Just put your own name or your own handle or your institution. And then finally, a summary of the outcomes. What was the comparison? What's the visual that goes with it? And then some of the data that gets at it. This is a short demonstration because when I was creating these visual abstracts, people said, like, what software are you using? Is this, Adobe After Effects? I definitely experimented with all of those, but I actually found PowerPoint to be the most effective. One of the design principles that you'll see in the primer is thoughtful restraint. It's sometimes easier to be more effective with design if you have less tools at your disposal. So the first thing I do is literally just making boxes to create some visual fields and just changing the opacities there to kind of get the colors right and create these fields. I then just go add in the title and the citation. People want to know what the article's about and where it came from, and this is kind of easy content that you can get from the journal and plug that in. And then all of a sudden, just by making some boxes and adding in the citation, you're almost halfway done with the visual abstract. Next thing you want to do is add the key findings, and this is where you want to spend some time, what are the 3 main findings of the article? And once you're able to tease those out, you can then go ahead and put in the visuals. You'll spend a lot of time troubleshooting different visuals and trying to figure out what goes where and how to manipulate them to fit that right. But in a simple format of just using PowerPoint, you can create a very effective visual abstract and don't need fancy software to do it. So when you're creating a visual abstract, you're going to iterate, you're going to create multiple versions of it. You're going to try this font, you're going to try that, you're going to try this finding, that, this icon, that one. And you're going to want to know, like, is it ready? Like, am I done? Every time I do a workshop, people kind of raise their hand. I come over and they say, like, is this one ready? Is it done? Is it ready to go out? I have two questions that are kind of really my litmus test. The first one is, like, can you read it without stopping? Someone should be able to look at a visual abstract, know exactly where to start reading, move across it effortlessly without stopping or trying to figure out, like, where do I need to go? Do I start here? Do I start there? Do I have to go backwards? The second is, do they understand it the first time? If people don't understand it the first time, they got to go back, they got to look up a word, doesn't make sense, doesn't really go together, then you have more work to do. So as you're in the process of making visual abstracts, if the answer is no to either of these, you have more work to do and more opportunities to improve your design. How do you find images? So when I started doing this, it was Google Images and the Noun Project, and kind of looking for things that had creative licenses that you could use appropriately. These databases have proliferated. There are too many to name. But one that I'll mention is called Health Icons. It's a group of artists who created health icons for free because they wanted health information disseminated more broadly. And if you go to this website, it's frequently updated. You can find many health icons available for free. I want to use this last section to sort of give you the broader view of visual abstracts. There certainly is a domain where journals are using it to disseminate research, and I think that's super important. But it's really taken on another life that I think is super important. The first is it's kind of just become integrated into research curriculums. We've taught it at a number of our national surgery courses. At UNC and at Brown, it's taught in their public health and medical schools. This was a great example that was pioneered by Dr. Chelsea Harris. We were both sitting at the Association of Academic Surgery presidential address by Dr. Caprice Greenberg, and it was such an incredible talk. Everybody's on the edge of their seat, and I remember us thinking, gosh, we wish more people knew about this talk. So it went up on YouTube, got watched a lot. But then Dr. Chelsea Harris created a visual abstract of the talk that kind of hit the key points what the talk was about, and then shared it with the YouTube link. And you could just see the views go up exponentially after that, because there are a lot of people who are interested in the topic, but just by seeing the title of the talk, maybe didn't know what was in there, but seeing a short visual summary helped them know, hey, this is a talk I want to go listen to and make time for it. We asked Atul Gawande to write an editorial for us about the role of surgeons in addressing the opioid epidemic and opioid stewardship. And in this 1,000-word beautiful essay, he made 6 recommendations about what we could do. And so we made that into a visual abstract that summarized his 6 recommendations. And one of the things that we noticed is after we shared the visual abstract, we saw the article get picked up in multiple news outlets. And we heard back from one of the reporters who told us, you know, I knew the topic was important, but the article is behind a firewall, and I didn't really understand all the stuff in the article. But when I saw the visual abstract, I knew exactly what it was about, and I knew that was content that was important to the piece I was writing, so I knew to reach out to the author and get more information so I could reference the study in the book. I used to get a text almost every week early on in the first couple of years of this saying, hey, I just saw another visual abstract in someone's talk. It tends to be like an easy way to get people to talk about your work because you kind of made the slide for them. And so I've seen a number of people who've gone back to older studies and made the visual abstract for them as a way of re-upping the shelf life for articles. And this was a surprise to me. This was the most shared visual abstract out of the first 2 years. And it was about antibiotic stewardship. Now, if I could think of a topic that surgeons maybe aren't like staying up all night thinking about, antibiotic stewardship's maybe one of them. Not that we don't have interest in it, but it's probably not top of mind for most of us. But what occurred to me is that people were attracted to it because it was guidelines and it helped people know what to do. And there was something there. So I've spent a good bit of time thinking about like what's the next frontier of visual abstracts, and I think there's a lot of things we could do beyond research dissemination that would really help us deliver better clinical care on the ground. The first is in preoperative education. This format would certainly be a great way to visually prompt clinicians when they're sitting with patients to talk about risks, benefits, and alternatives, and have procedure-specific visual guides that help facilitate that conversation. Next is in procedural learning. I certainly spend a lot of time teaching my residents how to do certain operations, and most of them have 3 or 4 key steps that I try to walk them through, and there's another format that can do that. Research trial recruitment. So I was reached out to by a couple different cancer centers who said, people come to our centers to enroll in research trials, but when they come, we give them a stack of papers this big of a bunch of different trials, and they get so overwhelmed by it. Wouldn't it be great to just have a visual abstract that summarizes each of the trials so they could quickly look through and say, hey, no, those are 2 or 3 that I want to go learn more about, and then they know to kind of look at that content. And then finally, summarizing practice guidelines, kind of like I alluded to in that previous visual abstract. We have so much content information coming at us all the time. Wouldn't it be nice that if some of our most important practice guidelines that need to stay top of mind all the time had short summaries that help remind us how many days for antibiotics, when we're supposed to do this indication, when we're supposed to discharge to include this and this. It's just a real practical way to help us in day-to-day care. I'm going to wrap up and leave you with a final cautionary tale that when I made the visual abstract, it was very clear that many people went a little bit rogue and started maybe misusing the visual abstract, using the visuals to kind of overstate or overextend their study findings, putting stuff in the visual abstract that wasn't even in the article. And so I tried to write very early some guidelines that were published in AJG on guidelines to make an effective visual abstract. But what was really striking is this study that came out a few years later. This was in Annals of Surgery, and the authors went through 25 surgery journals that have adopted the visual abstract and ranked them both on those guidelines, like did they adhere to guidelines on content accuracy, study design, and in visual quality. And you can kind of see here, there's a huge variation. There's some journals, like Journal A, who on average hit 14 of these 15 criteria and produce a high quality visual abstract every time. And then there are some, like X and Y, who it's a little all over the place, but on average, they're probably missing about a third of the elements that could do it. So taking that together, I think when we started visual abstracts in 2016, it was this really steep learning curve of innovation where it was kind of an N of 1. I was like one of the only people making them. And so it was really easy to control quality because I got feedback pretty quickly and learned. And then we were in this phase of rapid adoption where everybody was adopting it. This journal, that journal, this institute, this different university. And there's really a bunch of ebbs and flows in quality. And I think the era that we're moving to now is really standardization and quality improvement. You'll now notice that many journals have their own staff and editors who manage visual abstracts, curate them, make sure the content's accurate as a way to improve the quality across the board. So I'll leave you with a couple final thoughts about visual abstracts in your work. There's no question that it's a way to disseminate knowledge, and that's been replicated in multiple trials as a true strategy to do that. It is a beautiful tool with a hidden curriculum that it actually clarifies your message. I remember when I went to do my workshop at the CDC, I asked all these famous people at the CDC, bring your favorite paper that you've ever written, bring it and let's make a visual abstract. And one of them came up to me afterward and said, Andrew, I've read my paper so many times, but now that I've been forced to put it into this visual format, it's made me think a little differently about the paper, and I almost wish I could go back to the paper and clarify what the key messages were to just make that more accessible to authors. So I often like using the visual abstract just as a way to help people clarify their message. And then finally, think about it as a point of intervention, whether it's in talking to patients and preoperative education, whether in the hospital as a way to remind people of guidelines, or with your learners. It really has potential to be an important tool that we use as an intervention to improve care delivery. So with that, I'll say thank you for listening. My contact information is there. I'm hopeful this talk was helpful to you and look forward to the comments below and engaging with you. Thank you.